Today, let's talk about a faction if you like either world wars, military, normal humans that fight against all odds, leaders that they're strategic tactical genius, but also can technically keep up with Space Marines, just a bulwark or anvil of the Imperium. Technically, the actual name is Hammer of the Imperium to add. Anyways, if you like any of that, you will probably like the Astra Militarum, also known as the Imperial Guard. Now, two quick disclaimers. First, the Guard and the Militarum thing, and then about the faction and its sub-factions. So first, Imperial Guard and Astra Militarum trademark stuff. So originally, and you'll still hear them say it sometimes, it's what's called the Imperial Guard. However, from what I heard, and also knowing how James really likes his trademarks and copyrights, they changed the name to be the High Gothic version and the more trademarkable Astra Militarum. So that's the real world reason. But as mentioned in lore sometimes, in short, they will just say the Guard, but at least the codex and the official name-wise, it's Astra Militarum. Like how Space Marines are Adeptus Astartes, and Space Marines is more of an in-universe name if they don't just say Astartes. The Astra Militarum is a military branch of the Imperium, nicknamed the Hammer of the Emperor. The Imperial Guard is known for countless numbers of infantry, so numerous that to the leader wielding them, they are comparable to grains of sand falling through their hands. The Guard is also well known for its overwhelming firepower. Side note, if you're laughing because you're thinking about the las gun, enough of them can still deal some serious damage. Now add in their endless numbers to heavily armed and armored vehicles, tanks, and super heavy tanks, but add endless volleys of powerful artillery, and you have a force that, especially in competent hands, is a force to be reckoned with. Truly a Hammer of the Imperium. Honestly, some humans are so smart, or the commanders are so intelligent, they mentally measure up or significantly even sometimes surpass Space Marines. Before going to layout of an actual army, let's clarify the difference between the Guard we all know and PDF forces. PDFs are planetary defense forces. Their goal is to defend the planet, whether it be internal or external. If internal, they will act like the National Guard and be called when needed, although way meaner. Meanwhile, for comparison, the Imperial Guard is more like the actual army. PDF's goal for external threats is to attempt to defend the planet and its assets, but usually it is just honestly to hold off the enemy as long as they can till the Guard arrives to reinforce. It doesn't matter if the Guard is off-world or on the world, the PDF's goal is to just defend the planet. A regiment, even if they usually defend a planet, can be called off-world, and it's not that the PDF can't go off-world, but usually will not ever be called off-world, as they are meant to just guard their world. To briefly cover equipment, they can be seen with las guns like the Guard, but it's also not uncommon to see them with any projectile weapon, so anything close to a modern firearm. Now let's talk about just the Guard, and more specifically, their army and regiment structure. Militarum constitutes the general staff of the Imperial Guard. It also monitors the tithes imposed on worlds. Usually the tithes are paid with soldier regiments sent out to uphold the planet's pride on some distant battlefield, but tithes can also be resources, equipment, and just anything of value to the Militarum, but most commonly it's usually more soldiers for the battlefield. Getting off topic there. The staff of the Militarum also administers the Imperium's numerous war zones. Its agents gather armies for each war zone. They will be a liaison between the Militarum and the Navy for transport of the Militarum troops. To ensure loyalty of their soldiers, the Militarum will deploy commissars on the front lines. These agents will also handle particular requests of senior officers, availability of recruiting worlds near the war zone, or in-transit forces. They will also try to account for the tumultuous nature of the warp. All this must be accounted for and then weighed against the importance of the worlds under threat, especially since to create a force large enough can take months or even years. Some regiments may still be forced to fight, but are not suited for that warfare. An example in the 9th edition codex is a regiment that is akin to fighting in desert sandy climates may have no choice but to fight on an icy planet, since no regiments that come from an icy world could reinforce them in time. Sometimes all this work is for naught, as the Militarum, due to the Militarum's and Administratum's bureaucracy and politics and add time of creating a fighting force, will arrive too late to a planet and the planet will have been destroyed. The Militarum is, although important to the Militarum, is still a part of the Administratum, so tends to be slow and difficult at the best of times. Now I know that was more of a side note, but let's continue on and let's talk about the actual structure of the Militarum and how it's laid out. The Astra Militarum is absolutely colossal, and for its size and necessarily decentralized organization, its command structure is still built upon a labyrinthine yet rigid structure. Discipline within the structure is ruthlessly enforced to ensure every soldier from the lowest soldier to officer to highest ranking members know their place. Ultimately, at the top of the structure is the Emperor himself. Now, the person in charge of all of this, the head of the Militarum, is the Lord Commander Militant. This person often appointed one of the High Lords of Terra, and rarely leave Terra for that matter. Their role is to represent the Militarum to the Senate Imperialis and then through the body's authority before Big E himself. In theory, with no issues, orders are issued by a Segmentum Lord Commander. The person is in charge of an entire section of the galaxy. The Lord Commander will then give orders to various sector officers and then subsector commanders, who then in turn relay the order to the individual Militarum regimentos. However, in practice, this system struggles from delays in communication and the immense distance between worlds. To add even more issues, the Imperium of Man is so large it prevents any meaningful central governance. To mitigate this issue, operational control of Astra Militarum forces is given to a high-ranking Militarum Regimentum officer. This person will also have the titles such as General, High Marshal, and this one is the weirdest one to me, or Lord Hetman. Don't know what that means, I'm too lazy to search. For the rest of the video, when referencing these leaders, I will either be saying General or High Marshal, just to clarify. This leader will be responsible for the completion of their given duties. These duties will be issued by a higher up, and then they could just be hold these planets or take these planets. Then it becomes the responsibility of the High Marshal or General for the deployment and application of all resources at their disposal to complete their goal. This system keeps the structure of the Lord Commanders and their subordinates giving out orders whilst maintaining other Militarum duties. This also gives the High Marshal in charge a good degree of freedom in completing their goal. In theory, let's be honest, most of them are probably more like, he got this order to leave me alone so I can live on the planet safe and in peace, all Imperial governor/nobility style. First, beneath a force overall ground commander and their numerous support staff and attaches are individual regiments, and that regiment's commanding officer. Now, within one of these armies led by a high marshal, there are regimentums, which are comprised of multiple regiments. It's gonna get really confusing here. Now, within one of these armies led by a high marshal, there are regimentums, which are comprised of multiple regiments, all of which generally come from the same planet. This is to keep the regimentum's forces more coherent with fighting style, culture, etc. Now, in the book, this lore tidbit is placed just like how I'm placing it here, but to add in more lore, even officials of the Militarum use the words regiment and regimentum interchangeably. So when saying Acadian regiment, it could be multiples, or it could be one regiment from the regimentum, which again is a conglomeration of regiments. Then to add even more, on their homeworlds, these regiments may be broken down into subgroups or have other names, but at least within the Guard, they are just considered a regiment no matter what. Okay, I get slightly better after this, I promise, just slightly. Okay, first I made this little graph, and let's go through it. So a regimentum is made of regiments. Then regiments are made of companies, which there's at least 3, but sometimes there are several dozen companies within the regiment. Then, this can depend on the regiment in question, so I'll say both, but then a company is made of platoons or squadrons, which also depends on what type of company it is. Like if it's a vehicle, it's squadrons, and if it's infantry, it's platoons, which then are made up of squads, officers, and sergeants. It's a loose structure, so it honestly just kind of depends on lore, and if you're making a custom army on your lore for your army, so it's very flexible. But as a whole, in an attempt to simplify everything I've mentioned, before we talk about a few regiments of note, let's break down the structure one more time. So if you don't want to listen to this, just skip to the next part. I'm just trying to like recap everything, because this was a lot of little side notes practically everywhere I felt like I was putting together. First, we have a Segmentum Lord Commander. They're sector and subsector commanders who relay overarching orders to a general/high marshal. This head leader of a campaign, be it for one planet or many, doesn't matter, they have full discretion how to use the resources allotted to them by the Militarum. The High Marshal will control multiple regimentums, which are comprised of multiple regiments, and then these regiments are generally not only from the same world, but are also the same type of regiment. This isn't always the case, but sometimes they will blend ones from different worlds, but generally not. And also there's not just the same type of just infantry, they could have a combined arms that have multiple, but for specific goals, the general may combine multiple different kinds of regiments to produce a combined armed regiment, which can be different kinds all in one. Example, not all just infantry, but also tanks and so forth. Continuing back on the breakdown, so a regiment then is made up of companies, which are made up of platoons or squadrons. To continue again, let's assume that company is made up of infantry, so then the companies are made up of platoons, which are made up of an officer and their staff, and then several guardsmen squads. They're each led by a sergeant. When a regiment is created, trained, and equipped on a planet, and then sent out as needed or tithe, that regiment will be, to say simply, themed around the planet's culture. Some planets like Krieg are wastelands after 3,500 years of fighting, and during the fighting, besides the cult of sacrifice being made, the Death Corps adopted a preference for trench, World War I style attrition tactics, and if not death by artillery, then death by numbers so impressive that the rest of the Imperial Guard worry for the loss of life, which is saying something. Where a regiment hails from has a great impact on every aspect of the regiment, from their weapons, clothes, food, lifestyle, entertainment, tactics, beliefs, or in short, culture in general. I specified this section, albeit more simple, to reinforce the difference in regiments and how, when creating your own regiment, how their homeworld would greatly impact who they are. Now that we're done with that, let's briefly talk about a few regiments, starting with the Guard's version of an Ultramarine, or their most popular one, quote unquote, the one they make the most, they like the most, the Cadians. Before its destruction, RIP Cadia, Cadia was a fortress world near the Eye of Terror. Since it was so close to the Eye, this world was set up as a fortress world, or basically one giant space castle. This planet produced a lot of soldiers that were sent out into the galaxy. Cadians born on Cadia also have purple eyes, since they were born near the Eye of Terror. Now, this isn't a Cadia video, and I'm really keeping it brief, but just know they are a more common regiment to find in the Imperium, or the Cadians' equipment and training styles are trained to non-Cadian born regiments and will look similar. Lore reason to have Cadians be non-Cadians basically is they just use the same equipment. But as a whole, Cadia did send out a bunch of regiments as tithe. Let's talk about some other regiments. First, we have Rambo-themed guardsmen from a death world called Catachan, where there is a frog, and I can't remember its name, but there is a frog that can blow up and destroy a very, very large area. It's basically a frog nuke. Steel Legion. Mechanized APC deployment style tactics from a hive world of Armageddon. RIP Commissary Yarrick. Gazgul will get vengeance on Angron. There's also the Morian Iron Guard, the Talarn Desert Raiders, the Tanith, the Valhallans, Maccabian Janissaries, Vostroyan Firstborns, Death Corps of Krieg, Elysian Drop Troopers, and many, many, many more. I don't want to go through all of them, honestly. I know I just listed them off, but there's a lot. All differ from one another quite a bit, and they honestly all deserve their own video. This was a quick overview of what the Astra Militarum, or the Imperium's army, is. And if applicable, any questions? Any questions from the class? Yes, you. Okay. Thanks for stopping by, and I hope you have a good one. Bye. The planet broke before the Guard.